I was at Apple from 2016 to 2018. I was leading the Siri music team, and it looked great. And to this day, I still have former colleagues reach out and say, I loved the culture that you built there, and I really miss it. This was such a powerful moment for me. Having an inclusive team with high psychological safety is crucial for high performance. The CEO doesn't care if it takes 10 minutes or 6 months, other than the impact that's going to have on the business, right? They don't care how complicated it is. It's about really showing your value from the business perspective and really understanding people's motivations. And from their motivations, that's how you learn how to influence somebody.
From scaling engineering teams at Apple and Tile to coaching tech executives and women in leadership, today's guest has lived the highs and lows and the turning points of careers in tech. In this episode, we're going to explore how AI is shaping leadership, what it takes to build inclusive cultures, truly inclusive cultures that actually last, and how to define success on your own terms. Joining us is Jossie Haines, executive coach, fractional engineering leader, and former VP of engineering at many great companies. Welcome, Jossie. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Absolutely. You and I had a really good discussion, a lot of different things that we're going to unpack today and continue the conversation on. I mean, right off the bat, your story, you walked away from top corporate leadership roles to create something new for yourself. What was the turning point and why did you go that direction? Because once you work at a great place like Apple and you're kind of handcuffed, right? Great benefits, great comp, great, stability. Why would anyone leave to kind of go do it on their own, I guess?
Yeah, so I was at Apple from 2016 to 2018. And, from the outside, it looked great. I was leading the Siri music team during the development of the HomePod. So we added 30 new features there. I was leading the Siri on Apple TV team. I actually won a technical Emmy for that integration while I was there. And I started Women at Siri, and it looked great, right? But internally, I was really struggling. I was going through a lot of imposter syndrome. I didn't feel included. I tried starting a mentoring program as part of Women at Siri. The VP at the time said he didn't believe in mentoring, so I wasn't allowed to start it. And it got to the point where I was just so burnt out. I actually didn't think I was a good manager. And so I was like, I need a break from my career. And so I left Apple really kind of at a low point at this time. And it was really interesting. Like the last day I was there, as I was leaving, one of my colleagues actually told me, like, you were the best manager I've ever had, Jossie. And that really resonated because I'm sitting here going through all this imposter syndrome thinking like, I can't cut it as a manager. And yet people are telling me I did such a good job, and I didn't believe it. And so I gave myself a break, took some time to myself, and really realized I didn't want to leave tech. I wanted to work somewhere where I could really build inclusive teams that thrive. And so when I went to join Tile, I said to the CEO at the time, and I told him, look, I'm happy to join as your platform engineering director, but I want to make sure we build an inclusive culture. I want to start that mentoring program, make sure that it's successful, and I want to help lead your DEI efforts and not have it just be considered like a nice to have.
Sure.
And he surprised me. And he actually said, Jossie, I promised my wife and daughters I was going to make Tile the best place for women to work in the Valley.
Wow.
And so I joined and we delivered on that promise, right? And it wasn't just me. It takes, and we'll talk about this when we talk about building inclusive teams. It really does take the effort of the entire leadership to commit to this and really tying goals to these things. And to this day, I still have former colleagues reach out and say, Jossie, I loved the culture that you built there and I really miss it. And so that was really heartwarming. During my time at Tile, fast forward a number of years, I was there for 4.5 years. I ended up designing my VP of engineering role. It was a proposal as we were about to scale. I got my boss promoted to CTO, and I was working with an executive coach at the time. And I didn't even realize you could create your own role, let alone become a VP when the role doesn't exist. And it made me realize like I got to define what I wanted and success on my terms. And I did it because I wasn't just thinking about me, like creating this VP role made sense for the organization because of how we were scaling and growing. And so I really focused it on the business need, the business impact of why this made sense, because then I could focus on hiring. We basically doubled the engineering team in 4.5 months, completely restructured how the organization was run to be effective. And it worked. And I realized I want to help other people do this. Like, this was such a powerful moment for me. And so in July of 2022, I left Tile after it had been acquired by Life 360 and started my own business coaching engineering leaders and women in tech.
Wow. That's where you are now. I like it. Jossie, you mentioned imposter syndrome. It's really nice that someone reached out to you and told you were such a good manager, because I feel like leadership could be a very thankless job. And I feel like we're in an era where things have flipped, that we're supposed to celebrate our employees all the time, which I think is nice, but they almost need it if you say nothing. Back when we were growing up, it's like if the teacher or the boss or didn't say anything, it just means, hey, you're good. Don't bring stuff up. You're doing fine. You don't need to go digging. Now it's like, if you don't constantly comment on stuff and give feedback, especially positive, then people freak out a little bit. On the flip side, the managers, the leaders don't get any love, and so they don't know if they're appreciated, if they're loved, if they're hated, if whatever, right? And so it's really nice that someone kind of said something that made you rethink your kind of thoughts about it, and how you said you had a little bit of imposter syndrome about, hey, maybe I'm not a good leader. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, what role did that imposter syndrome play in your own journey?
Yeah. And so, if I reflected my career, prior to Apple, I was at Zynga for 5 years. Wow. Zynga is a gaming company. I joined actually the week we were taking on Facebook back in the Facebook gaming days. And my career at Zynga really thrived. I went from a software engineer to a director of engineering in a year and a half. I launched new games. I ran our advertising team. I helped design our storage architecture. But I realized while I was there that I had a very different story than other people at Zynga, because I had a really supportive manager who really helped me thrive. And so then fast forward to Apple, I felt very isolated and alone. And I really looked at that from a contrast perspective. And I think that is really where part of the imposter syndrome comes in. And this really goes back to your point about, I tell my coaching clients all the time, like, when you get to the VP level, the only feedback you're going to get is you've messed up.
Yes. Yes.
And so a big part of it ends up being, hey, how can you build that self-trust and self-worth in yourself, right? How can you look at the signals of what's going on? Is your team feeling engaged, right? Are they motivated, right? How can you look at these things and realize, okay, you're not going to get the positive feedback, but how do you build that yourself so you're not just always questioning? And sometimes, and this is one of the things I love about coaching, is having a coach can really help you see, okay, is that story you've been telling yourself true? And is there actually data to back it up? Or is that just a story you've created in your head because you're isolated potentially, or because there's nobody else in the room giving you positive reinforcement?
It's like you should not need it necessarily. You should build your own parameters where you have your own measures of how you're doing. I like that.
Right.
And having ongoing conversations with your team members is a great start, right? Feedback 360. How am I doing? Are you getting what you need? Great. Now here's my feedback. Jossie, let's talk about a pretty important topic that a lot of times is is treated as a check a box, right? There's this like diversity and inclusion piece, which I was telling you, we're a global technology consulting recruiting firm. And one of the things we used to hear is, in the EE, they're really about the diversity and inclusion. And then the conversation disappears. Now that they don't need to attract as many people and they're laying people off and why should we hire you is back. What's happening is that conversation has disappeared, which is very disappointing. And I never appreciated the check a box approach to it because it felt so inauthentic. We built an entire team just to serve the diversity and inclusion piece. In fact, that team was diverse and inclusive, so they can, inclusive, so they can go out and speak speak and understand the challenges of these people. So let's get into this topic and why it actually matters and why it's good for driving performance. That's the misunderstanding. It's not fluff if done right. Let's talk about that.
Absolutely. So let's literally start with Google's research on high performing teams. So I guess this was maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more at this point. Google actually did research on what it takes to build a high performing team. And having an inclusive team with high psychological safety is crucial for high performance. So that's one aspect of it, is if people feel they can speak up, that their opinions are heard and valued, they are going to build better products and have higher performance. And let's talk about that better products piece, right? Because especially my background is a lot in the consumer space, right? I've built products that I've used by millions, actually most likely across my career, billions of people across the products I've used. And that is a diverse group of users who are using those products. And yet, if the only people building those fit like a certain stereotype of, what a software engineer should look like, you might actually be missing features and functionality that will allow you to build a product that will work better for your customers. Sure. One example I like to share from my experience is voice assistants actually work less effectively for female voices and those with accents. And one of the reasons why is most of the people who's testing this are the employees, and that's not the employee base at a lot of these companies, right?
Interesting. So it could be quite frustrating for a woman or anyone with an accent, which is, frankly, if you think about spoken English, if you remove the Brits and Australians, the only people that speak American English is the 350 million people, if that, right? Because then half of the people probably have accents and half are babies and so on and so forth. So interesting. Okay. So that's one piece. Okay. What else?
Yeah. And like I said, it's also the high performance part, right? You are going to get more, effective use of your teams if they feel included, if they feel they can speak up, if they feel that they can have a constructive disagreement, right? A high-performing team is not one that just sits there and kumbayas and agrees to everything. A high-performing team is one that is willing to listen to a viewpoint that is different, have an effective, constructive disagreement, and then come to a decision. And that is actually directly tied to inclusion. And then going back to the checkbox approach that everybody was using to build these teams, part of the problem that I saw was people were focusing on diversity first and not inclusion. Diversity is easier to measure, right? You can look at numbers. You can look, how many women did I hire? How many people of this background or race did I hire, right? Versus inclusion is a harder problem to solve. You have to apply it to all of your ways of working. How do you ensure the people with diverse viewpoints get invited to meetings? How do you ensure everyone's getting constructive feedback that is actually effective, right? And part of it is we all have unconscious bias,
Of course.
right? I speak about this. I do this all the time and talk about inclusion. Yeah, I know I have unconscious bias, right? But when you bring that to the forefront and you can slow down your thinking, you can think of, okay, where does bias come up? For example, during the hiring process, when you're doing those final feedback meetings where you're discussing a candidate, if you start the meeting with a conversation and just a quick reminder that, hey, we have unconscious biases, these things can impact our decision. Just mentioning that at the beginning can help reduce bias during that feedback conversation. But it's a lot more work to focus on inclusion. So again, the focus ended up being on diversity. But if you don't have the inclusive piece, you end up having the revolving door that we've had in the tech industry since, DEI became a thing people focused on.
Sure. One of the things, Jossie, we used to struggle with is a company would say, hey, we really want to hire diverse talent. We want this. But then people would go to the panel interview back when people did physical panel interviews, and they would be in a room with like 8 exact same clones. And they were like, hey, yeah, it's nice that they're saying these things. But as a woman, it was kind of intimidating being around 8 guys or 6 guys and vice versa, right?
Right.
We had a client that the entire company, 99% of the company was one race. And so when this gentleman went on site, he saw the big picture, the school style Polaroid, and he was very intimidated. He's like, hey, like nothing against this culture. They're wonderful people, but I will literally be the only one, man. This is tough. So you have to be careful, right? You have to change the game by already having those people in the room. So Jossie, I guess the tough question for you is if you don't have those people, but you genuinely want those people, how can you create a strategy where you can get past this first stage, which is you're saying all the right things. I actually genuinely believe you. Your strategy is good, but you have none of these people to welcome me in. They're all the same, I don't know, 3-year-old, whatever, right? Fill in the blank. I can't even see if I would do well here. Like, how do you change the game starting at the interview process, let's say?
So I think first it's acknowledging that you want to change and bringing that up during the interview process and acknowledging like, hey, I know you're seeing this right now. Then speaking to, here are the inclusive practices that we have put in place already to make sure that when you do join, you are set up for success and that the burden doesn't fall on your shoulders, right? Because that ends up being one of the big problems. Like when you're the first, right? Or the only, it almost feels like the burden of DEI efforts ends up falling on the minority. And that's not fair. And so if you say like, hey, we've already started thinking about this. This is how we're looking at pay equity. This is how we're making sure that promotions are equitable. This is how we're thinking about integrating this into our ways of working. And also, we are receptive to feedback. We know that we are not perfect. We know that there might be places that we mess up, and we are open to changing if something comes up.
So a great start would be admitting, hey, 1, here's our plan, and 2, here's where our gaps are. Yeah?
Yep.
It's really good.
Yeah.
And how do you, Jossie, balance as a leader of a company, how do you balance this very important topic, this very important concept and function without taking eyes off the prize, right? Because at the end of the day, I think people can use anything good to kind of take their focus away from what they need to produce. And sometimes those results are harder to come by than doing something that's harder to measure. So they lose focus. How does a leader know that, hey, I do care about these things, but I need performance? How do they make sure that happens?
I think part of it goes back to the understanding that inclusion is an investment in high performance. If you do it just from the like diversity checkbox point of view, you're actually wasting time. Yeah. Like I'll just admit it right now. You are spending time, you're wasting time. But if you're really focusing on, I want to build a high performing team, And I'm doing that by making sure there's psychological safety. I'm doing that by making sure that we have our ways of working defined as a company. So little things, right? Like, how do we make sure meetings are effective? How do we make sure all the right voices are in the room? How do we make sure we allow people to speak up during the meeting and it's not just one person's soapbox, right? I mean, and these are just some tiny examples of it, but it's really about looking at it throughout the company and thinking about, okay, what are all these things that are going to make my team more high performing so that we can actually deliver on the products? And I mean, one of the things that's impressive is I think a lot of people assume Tile is a bigger company than it is. When I joined, I think we were around 60 people in total, 70 people in total. And this was something we focused on, right? So I think a lot of times there's this like mental image that, oh my gosh, this is going to take like tons of time. Like as a small company, I don't have the ability to do this. But if you actually start by this focus on high performance from the beginning, as you scale and grow, that will actually make it easier.
That's huge. Jossie, there's one inclusion or diversity piece that people never talk about, which is age. I've had the blessing of having people from, no joke, from 19 to 67 at my company and everything in between. These aren't like, oh my God, I have one 60-something-year-old and one, 19-year-old at the time. And currently, I mean, we have folks, currently it's 19 is no longer 19, much older now, but 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I mean, incredible. The mentorship that happened on both sides, and watching this, I mean, it completely made me a huge advocate of it. So when a client would say, hey, ideally no one over 40, I would say, whoa. First of all, not okay, not legal. Two, I won't do it. But you know how it is. I'm like, no, I don't know how it is. But there sometimes could be stubborn. I'm like, nope, you're hiring the wrong guys, buddy. Let me tell you about my 50, 60-year-olds who run circles around you and me. So, I mean, these people are healthier than the normal person. They sleep better, they show up better, they take less sick time. They are just more grounded people. So how do we get that in the conversation? How do we make sure that that's something that people aren't skipping when they're really trying to craft a strategy, not to check a box, not for lip service, but to genuinely do this? How do we make sure that's in the conversation?
Right. And I 100% agree. One of my best engineering managers was in his 60s, right? And it's like, and just the knowledge, the experience, and technology is about pattern matching as so often, right? It's about, I've seen this problem before. I've seen a similar problem before. I know how to solve it, even if it's not the exact same problem. And yes, I love my junior engineers, but they have not seen these things over 30, 40 years of their careers. And so there is so much value in looking at folks. And I mean, it's kind of sad because, there was a recent study around AI impact and the bias with AI usage. And it was looking at the fact that women, and they called them mature engineers, were biased more against when using AI than men.
Okay.
And then I went and looked at the paper, and mature engineers started at 35.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I'm way mature.
Yes, very mature. Aren't we all?
I'm like ancient in their mind. Yeah. But it's true. Like there's almost this perception like you're 40 and like now you have to go quit the tech industry. Yeah. And I mean, I'm also very against the whole like 996, like working 60 to 80 hours is how you build like effective products, because I mean, research has shown for decades that again, going back to high performance research, like our brains shut down after about 35 hours of intense, like, thinking and analytical work a week, right? We're not really getting the best work out of our employees at 60 to 80 hours a week.
No way. It's not fresh brain.
And so yeah, trying to tie it to like, oh, well, the 20-year-old can be in the office 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. It's like, okay,
which
but
is
are you
actually
really
inaccurate.
Building the best?
Jossie,
right,
by the way,
exactly.
It's inaccurate. It's often I've found the opposite way, right? The 20-year-olds have been almost brainwashed at work bad. So they need to cut off at a certain time or they're being taken advantage of, where the more mature person, whether 40, 50 or 60, needs what they need, but they need it. They need it because there's a real good reason. For example, hey, I got to go pick up my kids. I'll be back online in an hour, and I'll put, it's a different mindset, right? It's not a punishment to be at the office. It's not a punishment to work because they've seen it. They've seen the trends you talked about and the waves of nonsense that have come their way, and and
they know how to be effective.
Exactly.
Like when you've been doing this for over 20 years, you know how to be most effective at getting your job done.
Sure.
And you know that maybe you're like, I've learned my peak productivity is not like, everyone says like mornings or peak productivity. I'm like, no, for me, like I get most creative between 4:30 and 7 p.m. at night. My favorite job when I was like purely coding, I showed up around noon and left at 8 and did most of my coding between 5 and 8. And it was great. But I've learned that about myself.
That's it.
And I know that. So I don't try to do massive creative work at 9 a.m. because I'm not going to produce my best work. And you don't know that at the beginning of your career.
That's great. As far as advice goes, one of the things that you said earlier that I want to tackle is you said, Apple looks so beautiful on the outside. I had a friend, he managed, I think, 600 engineers at Google, and I won't say his name, but basically I met him up. I said, hey, how is it? And he says, let me ask you a question. Is the food on the menu, when the food arrives, is it as good as what was shown on the menu? And I was like, well, that's an interesting way to know. I guess not. He goes, no, it's a great place. Don't get me wrong. One of the best places I've ever worked, but no, it's not as advertised. So that's an interesting topic that people don't think about. That's one. And then two, one of the things that I think maturity brings you is it brings you a little bit of long-term thinking, right? One of my favorite text messages from former employees who were very young would be like, hey, 7 years later, like, I don't know if I ever showed how much I appreciated that place, but it was, HireCloud was the best place I've ever worked. I'm like, whoa, you weren't very appreciative when you were here. It didn't seem like you were very happy. And it takes time to know what you have, what was good, what wasn't. But you can't if it's your first job or your second job. That's really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it does take time to gain that appreciation, to start learning about yourself. And it also takes time to learn to set boundaries, and not just for the sake of saying no, but setting boundaries for this because you do truly believe on building an amazing product. And you know that by setting these boundaries, you will actually do so, even if it upsets somebody in the middle.
Yes. I had a young man. I was really good. He would say, hey, I'm going to work my ass off when I'm here at 6 o'clock until 9. I completely cut off, heads up. Like if I ever don't pick up, is because I've completely turned off my phone. I do a thing, it's his private thing, but I appreciated that. But when he was there, he was cranking and he was working. And when he was gone, he was gone. He had set up his boundaries. His weekends was his weekends and his evenings were his evenings. When he was here, he gave it all. So, but he gently nudged and communicated his need. And it was very understandable, Let's talk a little bit about AI, right? You said something really interesting. You said that on our call, you've noticed that many engineering leaders aren't actually using AI, even as their teams build AI products, which is hilarious. Why is that? Tell me about that.
I think part of it's not that they don't want to use it, right? I think maybe they tried it once. There's also 1,000,001 tools, like what works, what doesn't. their engineering leaders today are being asked to do more with less, right? They're starting to get larger teams. They don't have time to think about this. And a lot of the AI goals that they've been given are very vague, right? At one of the big companies, literally each manager was told, everybody on your team needs to do something AI related. That's it. And it's like, that's not a business goal. Like, what's the real outcome there, right? And so I think part of it is just, and so often, a friend of mine who runs a small startup, she went to a founders event that her VC was sponsoring, and they had somebody come in that talked about like how to use AI effectively. And the person was talking about all of these use cases around coding. And then somebody said, well, how do you use it? Like, or what about leadership use cases? What about other use cases? And the person presenting didn't really have good answers. And so I think that's the other side. Like, we see it from the big pushes, like, how do we make coding more effective? How do we use it for inspection? Getting rid of QA potentially, like all of these things. But not as many people are also focusing on, okay, you can also use it from the leadership side. And then going back to that article that I mentioned earlier about bias in AI, one of the things that's interesting that talked about is that when the leaders leverage AI and show like, hey, there is value in doing this, and it's a positive thing, right? Because in that study, it was shown that people were being considered like, oh, if you're using AI, you're not cutting it as an engineer potentially. And so their code was considered less competent, even though it was the exact same code in both cases. And so having leaders starting to use it also really helps with the adoption piece of the engineers as well. But they're not being given good goals around it. They're just kind of being told to like use it. And then nobody's really talking about the leadership use cases.
I think another conversation that needs to shift, or approach that needs to shift, is it goes from like, did you use AI for this versus like, you better have used AI for this. I mean, you just sent me an 8-page strategic plan for Q4. I hope you didn't sit here and type this shit up for 8 hours of your day. I hope you prompted your way into something really thoughtful, and so I think that's a switch that needs to happen, because we're almost embarrassed that AI has helped us do something. Versus like, you should be embarrassed if you're not being efficient as a leader.
Yes. But you should be embarrassed if you use AI not effectively and you produce crap.
Yes.
Right? Like, that is where I want you to be embarrassed.
Yes.
Because that's also what I'm kind of seeing, is people are just producing like what's now being called like AI work slop, throwing it over the fence and being like, oh, I did the thing. And it's like, no, this isn't usable. Yeah. This is like, now I have to go do more work.
Yes.
Because you didn't do your job.
Yes. And it could pretty much be found out within 2-3 questions, or you see a gap. You're like, did you actually read this? Did you notice that this isn't this is okay. 80% of it is reasonable, but you clearly didn't really look through this yourself. So why are you giving it to me? So that bothers me as well.
And AI is really about getting you to that like 80-90%. And then you need to edit it. You need to put your own thought processes, because AI does not know what good looks like. And that is the key. The leaders and actually engineers who use AI most effectively use it as a tool to help them get to the 80%. And then they know where they need to step in to take it from okay to great.
Yeah.
And really knowing what good looks like. This is why it is actually much more effective for senior engineers to be using AI than junior engineers. Because senior engineers, they know what good looks like potentially. Sure. They know where you need to worry about security and architecture and all of these things that junior engineers might see some code that was produced and think, oh, that looks fine. But there's bugs in it, or there's security holes. So much of this, like these new vibe coded applications that are out there, the research studies against them are showing them they all have the same security holes in them, right? Like, because if you don't know to prompt the tools and say, hey, look at this from a security angle, like the same issues it won't. And the same issues just get introduced.
It's as simple as, hey, don't make stuff up. If you remember,
right.
Early on, it was like, this is brilliant. And then you found out, actually, it's not accurate. It's brilliant, but it's not accurate. Therefore,
Absolutely.
It's not brilliant. It sounded brilliant. I wouldn't have believed, Jossie, that engineering leaders aren't actually using AI unless... the night before, I think I told you before our conversation, I was at an event, and it was actually designed for like 18 to 20-year-old entrepreneur-minded young people. My daughter went to this event, and I showed up, and there's a guy that says, how many of you are using AI? And of course, everyone in the room picks up, their hand, and he says, that's interesting because you guys have a much higher rate of AI usage than leaders. And this guy's a VC guy. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. I'm surprised by that. And then a day later, you tell me that, and I'm thinking, okay, there's something to it. What are practical ways leaders can integrate AI into their workflows to free up time to be more strategic? Because that is one of the biggest struggles for leaders, is there's just not enough time to be strategic.
Absolutely. So this has become like a big passion project of mine recently. And so one is take a step back, right? Let's look at this from engineering first principles, right? So what is the actual problem you want to solve? So looking at it from two aspects. One is, what is the admin work that you are currently doing on an ongoing basis that you could leverage AI to help you with? And then the other aspect to look at is, what are your top goals, right? As a leader, not your team's goals, like your top goals. Like, what are the initiatives that you are currently working on, and how can you leverage AI to make you more effective or give you the research you need on those? So then you can do, like you said, the more strategic, uniquely human aspects of leadership. So for example, one of my coaching clients, she recently started at a new company, and she picked up a team. They own a lot of the legacy code base, and they're kind of struggling with like, oh, we don't know how long building a feature is going to take because they don't know the code base very well. And she's just jumping in. And she also doesn't know part of the technology stack. It's a hardware software company, and she doesn't have a lot of Bluetooth experience. So I said, okay, let's start with your challenges here. One is you want to get up to speed on this code base. Well, not only can you use code inspection tools to have it explain to you how the code base works, the general architecture, and you can have your team leverage those tools to help them figure out, hey, where are some of the potential gotchas, right? Like, and obviously it's a trust but verify, right? As we were saying earlier, you still need to make sure it's not making stuff up, but that'll get you a lot further than sitting there like reading code. And then one of the things was, so I said, like, she's not an expert on Bluetooth. So what I said was, like, I happen to have Bluetooth experience, right? From my tile days and what I'm working on right now as a fractional leader. I gave her an article on like, hey, here's the features that are coming with Bluetooth 6. Feed this into the LLM and say like, hey, help me start brainstorming how I could potentially leverage some of these new features with my product, right? And some of the stuff it came up with was actually interesting. Some of the stuff it came up with was useless, right? Sure. And again, you have to use your human brain and filter. But sometimes what you read is not just looking at a blank piece of paper, right? Sure. Just getting the ideas flowing. It can be very helpful. Another place that it's super helpful for leaders is, where is it that you're like coaching your team members a lot? For this example here, her team was a little junior and they didn't know how to break down project work effectively. And so I said to her, if you take a step back, could you walk through, like, on a step-by-step process, like how you would break down a project? And we went back and forth, and she came up with a process. And I was like, okay, well, you could actually feed that and create a custom GPT and then have your team use that so they could get a first pass of breaking down a project, and then you can help them take it from there. So it can help you coach your team to, again, get that really great first draft. So you're not doing like the low-hanging fruit stuff, and you're really helping, again, take things from good to amazing by doing those uniquely human things that the LLM can't do.
That's huge. The only thing that I think AI will end up leaving for us to do is to have deep, meaningful conversations with our
Absolutely.
our team members. That's it, right? Eventually, everything will be replaced by AI, frankly.
Yeah. And I actually have a guide with 4 workflows for engineering leaders that I'm happy to share the link
that would be great.
with you for in case your guests or your listeners are interested
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jossie, you brought up, I think, communication. I think we'll go down that route. Why do so many engineering leaders struggle to get buy-in from executives? And what does it mean to speak the language of a CFO or CEO to get more accomplished?
Yeah, so I think we're so focused, like we want to build amazing products, right? But we also we're engineers. We love geeking out about the technology. Like, oh my gosh, this problem's going to be so hard to solve. And in some ways, like, that helps our ego too a little bit, right? Like, oh, I solved this really hard problem and like, it took me so long. But at the end of the day, the CEO doesn't care if it takes 10 minutes or 6 months, other than the impact that's going to have on the business, right? They don't care how complicated it is. And so we really need to understand from a communication point of view, what is the business impact? And I work with so many engineering leaders on this because it really is shifting from, okay, I am doing hard work, right? Especially for the women I coach. They've so been trained that you do hard work and people are just going to magically know and you're going to be recognized for it. And that's not really the case. It's about really showing your value from the business perspective and really understanding people's motivations. And from their motivations, that's how you learn how to influence somebody. And I don't mean this in like some backhanded, like, let's be sneaky sort of way. But the goal is to influence, because we do truly understand sometimes, like, I know so many engineering leaders who get so frustrated. They're like, I'm saying no because I know it's going to have a negative impact from the business. And yet everyone just thinks I'm like the problem person, right? And it's just like, just shift how you're talking about it, right? Like, you also need to show up with a solution.
Yeah.
Right? I always tell people, instead of saying no, say, yes, that's a great idea. And here are some of the challenges, right? Just that small shift.
Yeah.
Makes the other person feel heard. They're not shut down. And then you can still say, oh, hey, this thing's not going to really work the way you want it to do, or here's the trade-offs, right? That's the other thing I always tell engineering leaders, right? Instead of just coming to a meeting and saying like, no, this isn't going to work, come at it from a trade-off conversation. If you would like that to happen, it's going to take 6 months of development effort. And we could do this other alternative and we could get it done in 2 months or 1 week, right? And here's how we're still achieving the business goals. That is going to get you seen as a solution person and not the problem person.
In improv, they say yes and versus but, no or but. You're not, literally allowed to use it. I think that's a really good practice. But Jossie, there was an author. I was trying to find the exact title of the book. I think his name is Chris Fennings. Great guy. And it was 1 Minute Meeting, I think it was. And he talked about, and it's a really good book, he talked about how this is kind of related, is how you can start with what you're trying to do, then fill in the data. And I often find really smart people lose me. I literally see myself glaze over and they lose me as I'm making eye contact, as I'm trying to really be respectful because I value that person. They completely lose me. And this person's boss has seen it in meetings. She's like, oh, I think you've lost them. Because I blank out because there's too much detail and there's a story behind the story and I don't understand it. And I glaze over and I'm gone. Versus the book teaches, say exactly what you want, what you need, and then explain why. For example, to talk CFO or CEO talk, you can go and say, hey, I think I have the solution to cut, I don't know, quote, to cash down by 2 weeks. Oh, got my attention. Go. And then you explain it, why your project is going to be the way to get to that and how much it's going to cost and why it's important and why you're confident and how long it'll take. I'm in. But if you start telling me a story and all this stuff and tools and technology and what other companies are doing and what you heard in a meeting and this amazing engineer and why it's important to do this for her because she can grow in retention, I'm like completely blanked out by then. And you're not going to get what you want. And unfortunately, I'm not going to get what I want as a business either. So
absolutely,
that's a really good way to go, is like, tell me exactly how it's going to help the business, then tell me the details, and everything else is, I might even stop you and say, Jossie, go. I trust your judgment. Go build it. You've got a great team. You've never let me down. Make it happen. So, and that's all you want. You just wanted the thumbs up that you can launch this cool product, or feature.
Yeah. And the details, again, especially at the CEO and CFO level, like, they do not care about the technical details, right? Unless they happen to be a technologist who can speak that language. Like, they really just want to, they trust you, right? They hired you. One of our core values at Tile, which I always appreciated, was start with trust, right? Okay. And I think that's important, right? They trust that you can do the thing that you said. So they don't need some crazy 10-minute explanation about the technical architecture and why this is going to take that long. And it's like, instead of giving them all that, let the other person ask the questions to answer the things that they
care about and need.
Yes.
That's really good. You were at Zynga during that huge pivot when you guys clashed and took on Facebook. What did that experience teach you about kind of resilience and pivoting smartly and all of that?
So it was, I have to say, this was the craziest way to start a job. Yeah. Because I literally joined the day that for 2 weeks inside the company, every game studio pivoted to building an alternative to Facebook.
Wow.
We basically built our own social network in 2 weeks.
Wow. Okay, so it can be done.
And I mean, it wasn't like great. It certainly wasn't as full featured as Facebook was, but it was just amazing seeing, because Zynga, as with many game studios, each game studio is run pretty independently. So it's almost like little mini companies within the greater company. There's some shared services, but each game studio is pretty independent. So first, it was literally amazing just watching the entire company pivot to build one thing and seeing it basically come to this point where it's like, oh wow, we can actually build something and deliver. And I mean, obviously Zynga still stayed on the Facebook platform and all this thing, but it gave the company negotiation leverage that wouldn't have been able to be possible if we hadn't gone and built another social network and been able to say, like, fine, if you're gonna do all these things, we can pull off of Facebook if we have to. Right?
You always negotiate. You always want to negotiate from a place of strength, not weakness.
Exactly. So we were able to pivot the entire company and pivot and just create like a real place of strength there. That's huge. So that was so amazing. And just being able to see that I could jump in on day one. And even though I didn't know the code base at all or anything else, like, I still was providing value, right? Like, I still was able to jump in and help and get up to speed and build things. And, the entire time at Zynga, I especially, we went from 1,000 to 2,000 people in my first year, right? So just like scaling that quickly, like it was a constant change, right? And just learning how to adapt to a constantly changing environment. A lot of the Zynga games lasted on average a year and a half, 2 years, right? So we were switching teams often. You know, I got pulled onto like, the top engineers would commonly get pulled onto like the top teams when like there was revenue needs. So like I got pulled off onto the Cityville team for 4 months, right? So just learning to be open to whatever happens when you show up on Monday morning.
That's great. That's really great. And I think one lesson that could be learned from that, besides obviously being very pivot ready, is the fact that too many companies, and I'm guilty of this, is we use a divide and conquer concept, which is like, you go do this, we'll go do this, we'll go do this, and then the company will move forward. The problem is you're only making small incremental changes that way versus what you guys built, right? It's incredible. Again, whether it has any uses or not, whether you guys actually launch it publicly or not, doesn't matter. You built something. One, now there's a belief in the company that it could be done, that anything can be done, and I'm sure that they used it for other reasons. And then two, you got a lot done in 2 weeks. Versus had you put a small group together and, hey, you 3 people do this skunk work project, and it probably would have taken 6 months and it wouldn't have been good at all. So you put an entire company behind it. So that's huge. Really cool.
Yeah.
Jossie, what's the biggest aha moment you've had as a leader?
Ooh, there's been a lot of aha moments in my career. I think the biggest one for me right now is, if I reflect back, the ability to trust in myself has been my success, right? I think that's been the aha moment. Now that since I've started my own business, right? Every opportunity I've landed is because I've asked for it, or it's something because of being in my network, or something I've done in the past. It has shown up for me, right? After I left Apple, I said, I am never interviewing. Like, I'm never going through a full-time interview in this industry again. Like, I don't really like the interview process, right? It's
broken. It's broken. I don't blame you.
It's broken, right? And so I said, you know what? I am getting my jobs in a different way. I am going to use my network. I am going to use my connections. I am going to ask for what I want. And, all of the opportunities that have shown up for me since then have either been people knew my value and they've come to me and asked it, or I have shown somebody how I can uniquely help them.
That's great.
And they have created a role or an advising opportunity for me because they see the great value that I can provide. And so often, as I have conversations with technology leaders, there's that fear in our brain, like going back to that imposter syndrome, like, what if they say no?
What if they say yes?
But what if they say yes?
Yeah.
And what's the worst thing about somebody saying no?
Yeah.
What does that really mean? It just means you've got more information. And so I think that's been the biggest aha moment, because people come to me, they're like, oh my gosh, Jossie, your career is so different. You've created all these opportunities. Like, I was coaching a leader, and she really wanted to take a break from her job to spend the summer with her daughter, but she was terrified in the current job market, like what's going to happen. But she really wasn't happy where she was. And I said, look at my story. Like, I got my opportunity to Tile because I happened to know the VP of engineering at the time. Like, he brought me in to help solve a problem. I contracted for a bit, and then they really wanted to hire me, right? And she's like, well, Jossie, you've got such an amazing background. And I was like, but look at the things that you have done too. And so she decided she was taking the summer off. But a week after she had quit, we had dinner, and she's like, I don't know, Josie. I made a mistake. Like, I shouldn't have done this. And I said to her, I was like, look, even if you're not holding faith in yourself, I am holding faith in you. And I believe that something will show up when it needs to. And so about a few weeks ago, she hit me up and she's like, Josie, you were right. Her previous company she worked at that she really enjoyed literally created a role that they thought she was be perfect to lead and staff up the team. Amazing. And they reached out to her and hired her.
Love it. Love it. That's really good. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
What's your favorite book that's influenced your leadership style?
So I love a lot of Cal Newport. His thoughts on like the deep life and really like creating success on your own terms. One of his most recent books is Slow Productivity. And I love that book. I have recommended it to many people. And because it really talks about the fact that, again, it's not the hustle that creates amazing things.
Yeah, it's great. It's really powerful. It's been great, Jossie. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on the Tech Leaders Playbook. We've redefined success, building cultures of inclusion that truly drive performance. That's key. And the opportunities and blind spots that AI adoption for leaders. For anyone that wants to connect with Jossie, you can find her through her coaching work and her leadership insights on LinkedIn. I highly recommend it. Thank you so much for being here.
It was such a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for having me.
Have a great one. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also help others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avetis Antaplyan, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.